Everyone. So Devon Dudley talked about ECW on a recent podcast. Here's what he said. This is from eWrestling News. WWE's version of ECW. I'll be honest, my opinion and Rob might be different for me, but when WWE did their version of ECW, no, I don't think it could have been saved. I think the crew that we had was like no other. And by that time, WWE got their hands on ECW and made their own version of ECW. I think knowing how we were back then, I just think it was over. Unless you have Paul Heyman running it, unless you have myself, Rob Van Dam, Balls Mahoney, Axel Rotten, the Gangsters, the Eliminators, Sabu, thing goes on and on. Unless you got those guys in there, you're not going to have an ECW. It's just that it was watered down version of what it once was, and it's not just because it was WWE putting a hand on it. On the importance of of ECW, we were special, we were different. That's why we became the revolution that we became because we were different and people wanted different, and we gave it to them. I don't think this generation could subdue the pain that we encountered because it was painful, and that's why when people say wrestling is fake, go F yourself. Okay, because you can't do what we do. You can never be on the road 300 days out of the year, still get up from a hotel room and still go. So it was one of those things where I get pissed off when people talk crap, but it is what it is. Again, if it wasn't for us, this new generation would not know what wrestling was all about. So I think he has a pretty good perspective on it. Part of the problem with ECW was that it really was like what's in the name. It was so extreme. And people back then loved it. It had a hardcore group of fans. If you watch that documentary that they did about Paul Heyman, he kind of talks about like, look, we were trying to grow. We went out of business not because we were not popular. We went out of business because we were too popular. They were so popular and yet they couldn't afford it because of different, they had to get on pay-per-view and I guess you needed to put the money up front and they couldn't do that. So just all of these little things really ended up hurting them, and they kind of got screwed in that sense. But I definitely can also see kind of the argument here of, ECW. Nobody even remembers when WWE tried to do it because it was nothing like what ECW was, and I don't even think WWE could possibly pull off ECW. You just can't. I mean, it was so extreme. There were so many weapons. There were so like I mean, WWE obviously took like kind of a lot of the hardcore matches of that sense and brought that into WWE. So they took like one of the main parts of ECW and brought it in, but it could never get to the level. And I don't know if you could have scaled ECW to the way you scaled WWE either because it's so extreme. It's like when you have that hardcore fan base, you could stay afloat, but you probably can't reach the heights of a WWE or even a WCW in some way. I mean, it just gets tougher because it's so much harder to get advertisers for something like that. Even at the peak of WWE, it's nothing like basically the median of ECW. The peak of WWE in some of their hardcore matches may not like you even talk about when Mankind gets thrown off the top of the cell, which was a crazy moment in WWE. And Vince was like, hey, thank you, Mick, for doing that, but don't ever do that again. That's what he said to Mick Foley. I mean, stuff like that, maybe not to that height, but stuff like weird, crazy flips and, off of big things through tables, throwing people off of things, stuff like that happened all the time in ECW. So it was just it was exactly what its name said. And it does suck that, it ran so hot and that it couldn't continue. But the beauty of it is you could always think back and be like, hey, man, that was some really great wrestling. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.